They say the strongest man who ever lived was not defeated by an army, not by war, not even by his enemies, but by love. Before his name became a warning, before his strength became a legend, before betrayal found him in the arms of someone he trusted, there was a prophecy, a child not yet born, already chosen. In a time when Israel groaned under oppression, when the Philistines ruled with cruelty and fear, hope did not come through kings or armies. It came through a promise, and that promise was a boy named Samson. From the very beginning, Samson was different. Before his first breath, his life had already been set apart. He was to live under a sacred vow, never to drink wine, never to touch anything unclean, and never to cut his hair, because his strength would not come from his body, it would come from something far greater. As Samson grew, so did the signs of that power. What other men struggled to lift, he could move without effort. What others feared, he faced without hesitation. There was something about him, something unexplainable, and people began to notice. But strength has a way of attracting attention, not just admiration, but danger, because while Samson was growing stronger, the Philistines were growing more afraid. They had never seen anything like him. A man who could not be controlled, a man who refused to bow, a man who could stand alone and still win. And fear always leads to one thing, a plan. But Samson had a different weakness, not in his hands, not in his strength, but in his choices. Because while he was chosen for a purpose, he was also drawn to what he should have avoided. Time after time, Samson walked toward danger, not away from it. He crossed lines he was never meant to cross. He got closer to people he should never have trusted. And slowly, without realizing it, he was walking straight into the one battle his strength could not win. Love. Because one day, Samson saw her. Her name was Delilah, and nothing would ever be the same again. She wasn't like the others. There was something about her presence, something in the way she spoke, something in the way she looked at him, that made even a man like Samson pause. And that was the beginning, not of a love story, but of a slow, silent betrayal. Because what Samson didn't know was that while he was falling for her, others were watching, waiting, planning. The Philistines had finally found their opportunity, not through war, not through force, but through her. And soon, the strongest man alive would face a question so simple, yet so dangerous, that it would cost him everything. Wait, I will tell you what to do. Love has a way of making even the strongest man lower his guard. And for Samson, that truth was about to unfold in the most dangerous way. What began as attraction slowly turned into attachment, and what felt like comfort quietly became vulnerability. Because with Delilah, Samson found something he had never truly allowed himself to have: closeness. A place where he could rest, a place where he could let go. But what he didn't understand was that not every place of rest is safe. Not every voice that sounds gentle carries good intentions. Because while Samson was falling deeper into trust, Delilah was stepping deeper into a mission. The rulers of the Philistines had made their offer: wealth, power, reward beyond imagination, all in exchange for one thing: the secret behind a man they could not defeat. And so, one quiet moment, One simple question changed everything. It didn't come with suspicion. It didn't come with force. It came softly, almost playfully. "Tell me, Samson, how is it that you are so strong? And how could you be subdued?" A question wrapped in curiosity, but carrying the weight of betrayal. And Samson, he smiled. Maybe he thought it was harmless. Maybe he believed she was just fascinated. Or maybe a part of him already knew and chose to ignore it. So he answered, but not with the truth. "If anyone binds me with 7 fresh bowstrings, not yet dried, I will become as weak as any other man." It sounded convincing. It sounded real. But it was a lie. And that night, while Samson slept, Delilah acted, silently, carefully, binding him exactly as he had said. And then, the moment came. "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." Her voice rang out in the darkness. Suddenly, urgently, and in an instant, he broke free, effortlessly. The bindings snapped like thread. The trap failed. And just like that, the truth should have been clear, but it wasn't. Because instead of leaving, instead of questioning, Samson stayed. And Delilah, she didn't stop. Again she asked him. Again her voice soft. Again her tone gentle. "You have made a fool of me. You've lied to me. Tell me the truth." And again he answered, "If they bind me with new ropes, never used, I will become weak." Another lie, another test, another chance to see what was happening. And again, while he slept, she tried. Ropes tightened around him. The trap set once more. "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And once again, he rose, unshaken, unstoppable. The ropes fell away, power still flowing through him. But something else was happening now. Something deeper than strength. Something more dangerous than any enemy. Because Delilah's persistence was not random, and Samson's silence was not ignorance. This had become a pattern, a cycle, a slow dance between truth and deception. And each time, they moved closer to the real answer, closer to the secret, closer to the moment that would change everything. Because Delilah was not done. Just like before. The same warning, the same moment. But this time, everything was different. He woke. He rose. He moved, just as he always had. Expecting the same result. Expecting the same strength. But nothing happened. No power. No force. No breaking free. Because the strength he had always carried was gone, and for the first time in his life, Samson was just a man, and the soldiers rushed in. No resistance, no struggle, only silence. The man who once stood unshaken now stood powerless, captured, broken, and in that moment, the betrayal was complete. Not just by Delilah, but by the choices that led him there. Because betrayal does not begin at the end. It begins in the small moments we ignore, the warnings we dismiss, the lines we cross. And Samson had crossed them all. And as he was led away into darkness, the weight of what had happened settled in. The strongest man alive had been undone, not by force, not by war, but by a whisper, a question, a moment of weakness, and a love that was never truly love at all. Wait, I will tell you what to do. There are moments in life When loss does not just take what you have, it takes who you are. And for Samson, that moment had arrived. Captured, broken, silenced, the strongest man who ever lived was no longer strong. The Philistines did not kill him. No, they wanted something worse. They wanted to erase him, piece by piece, to turn a legend into a warning. They bound him, they dragged him, and they blinded him. Not just his sight, but his sense of direction, his confidence, his identity. Everything that once defined him was taken away. And yet, the story did not end there, because even in darkness, something inside Samson began to change. Days turned into silence, silence turned into reflection, and reflection turned into understanding. For the first time, he was no longer surrounded by strength. He was surrounded by consequence. He remembered the questions, the warnings he ignored, the trust he gave too easily, the voice he chose over truth. And slowly, he began to understand something painful. His greatest enemy was never outside him. It was never the Philistines. It was never Delilah alone. It was the part of him that stopped listening too soon, that stayed too long, that believed what it wanted to believe. But even in his lowest place, something remained, a whisper of purpose, a reminder that he was not forgotten. Because strength does not only live in power. Sometimes it lives in repentance, in silence, in waiting, and far away, above the noise of victory's celebrations. A different moment was unfolding. The Philistines gathered for a celebration. They brought Samson out, not as a warrior, but as entertainment, a shadow of what he once was. They laughed, they mocked, they praised their victory, but they did not understand something. They thought the story was over, but redemption often begins where pride believes it has already won. Samson stood among them, weak, blind, but not empty, and in that silence, he lifted something greater than strength. He lifted a prayer, not for revenge alone, but for purpose, for one final moment, to mean something, to correct what had been broken, to finish what had been written long before he was born. And in that final breath, Samson reached for something greater than his past. He reached for meaning, because even a fallen man can still become part of a greater ending. One last act, one final moment, that would not restore what was lost, but would reveal what was always true. That strength was never just in his body, it was in his calling. And even in darkness, that calling was not finished yet. There are endings that do not come with peace, endings that do not restore what was lost, but endings that reveal the truth in its purest form. And for Samson, this was that moment. The crowd roared. Laughter echoed through the pillars of the great hall. The Philistines celebrated what they believed was victory, a fallen legend, a broken man, a story they thought had already ended. They placed him between the pillars, not with respect, but with mockery. Stand here. Let us see the great Samson now. Their voices filled the air, but Samson did not respond. Not to them, not to the laughter, not to the humiliation, because his focus was no longer on them. It was somewhere deeper, somewhere higher, and in that stillness, he whispered a prayer, not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet plea. from a man who had lost everything except one thing, his purpose. Lord, remember me, strengthen me, just once more. It was not a prayer for escape, not a prayer to undo the past, but a prayer to finish what had been started. And in that moment, something shifted, not in the crowd, not in the room, but within him, because the strength he had once carried was never truly his. And now, for the first time, he understood that his hands slowly reached outward, touching the pillars beside him. Cold, unmoving, massive, but not immovable. Not if strength returned, not if purpose remained. The laughter continued. The noise grew louder. They did not see it. They did not feel it. The moment that history was about to turn, and Samson took one breath, one final breath, and pushed. At first, nothing, just silence. Then, a shift, a crack, a tremor beneath the ground. The laughter began to fade. Confusion replaced celebration. And then, it happened. The pillars moved. The structure trembled. The ground beneath them began to break. And in a single moment, everything changed. The great hall collapsed, stone upon stone, weight upon weight, crashing down into chaos. The voices silenced, the victory destroyed, and in that final act, Samson fell with them, not as a prisoner, not as a broken man, but as someone who had fulfilled his purpose. At last, because sometimes redemption does not come by restoring what was lost, but by choosing what matters at the very end. And Samson, who had once been defined by strength, was now remembered for something greater. A man who fell, a man who failed, a man who lost everything, but still found a way to finish what he was meant to do. And in the end, the strongest man who ever lived was not remembered for how he fell, but for how he rose. One last time,